the cloud. There we go. So Erev Tov, everyone. Ah, Larry, I didn't see you. Hi, Larry. Larry, by the way, was the president of the synagogue that brought me to Temple Menorah. It was his decision to, in fact, he chased me, literally. He came to Asheville, North Carolina, showed up in the synagogue on a Friday night, made me an offer at the Onik Shabbat, followed me home, stuck his foot in the door, and then he came back the next day. So he wanted me to come back to Miami. He literally flew to Asheville to recruit me. So
best thing I could have done.
And I never repaid you for that flight. I guess I owe you. Okay. Well, tonight I opted to teach something about the Shoah, about the Holocaust, because tomorrow night is the International Jewish observance of Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Day. And as many of you know, I've been very active in Holocaust education. My first experience in Poland was in 1995 when Rabbi Avi Weiss, one of my great rabbinic mentors, he invited me to join him. And we went to Birkenau, where there's an illegal church. And we demonstrated, it was the 50th anniversary of liberation. And there were about 40,000 people there. And we got, we took over the, Rabbi Weiss doesn't believe in violence. So we non-violently did a sit-in and we refused to leave the illegal church. And we were eventually arrested, spent the night in in jail in Auschwitz in the city. That was my first experience. Then I went back in 2004, I went back in 2005. Then I went with the March of the Living. Then I went 2006, 2008, 2010. Back then the march went every 2 years, 2012, 14, 16, 18. And then I'm pretty sure I went 2019. That was before COVID-19, correct. And by the way, Federation is going back next year with a major trip because it is Israel's 75th. And they asked me to lead one of the buses to Poland, but they don't call it the march. They call it the Poland experience, Jewish heritage experience. But we do the same exact thing as the March of Living. So of all the camps, these are the camps in Poland. You should know that the reason why a vast majority of the concentration camps were in Poland, like obviously Auschwitz, Birkenau, Majdanek, Treblinka, Chełmno, Sobibor, is because the Jewish population of Poland was over 3 million. So they brought the concentration camps to the Jews. In areas of the Ukraine, in Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, they tried the final solution with what's called Einsatzgruppen, where they had mobile machine gun groups of Wehrmacht, regular soldiers. And after about 6 months, Goebbels ordered it to be stopped because when he went to visit, but that's where Babi Yar was. Babi Yar was the Einsatzgruppen of the Wehrmacht. Goebbels expressed concern that how these soldiers were going to come home to their wives and children and relate, because literally they would look into the eyes of their victims, men, women, and children, when they killed them. And Goebbels was afraid of how that would affect them when they got home. So that's when they came up at the Wannsee conference, the final solution to create concentration camps. And as you know, we just weren't forced into death camps. First it was ghettos, and then it was liquidating the ghettos, and then it was concentration camps, and then it was the death camp. It was a process to constantly fool us and trick us into acquiescence. Because Jews, even when you walked into the death camps, across the gates, it said, Arbeit macht frei. Work will make you free. And of course, that wasn't true at all. No one was going to walk out of there. But to the very last minute, I'm sure many of you have heard that there was soap involved in the concentration camps. And what has been documented that I'm going to show you pictures, that the Jews were led to their death and, hanging up their clothes, getting undressed, and being told that they were going to the showers, and they really weren't. It's documented that they actually had stones that were made to look like the famous German soap, square bars of soap, and they had soap written on them, so that Jews would count, oh yeah, look, we really are going to the showers. But some people noticed that they were too heavy to be bars of soap and whatever. But we might as well begin the evening, because it's time to start. So real quickly. So this is a map of Poland. So you get an idea of where Lublin and Majdanek is. Majdanek is the equivalent of saying, Bal Harbor to Miami Beach. It's really a neighborhood of Lublin. And here in the north over here is where Sobibor was. This is where Treblinka was. This is where, down here is where Auschwitz-Birkenau, and Majdanek is here in central Poland. And it was founded in 1941. Himmler was the one who decided that Lublin had a perfect place for Jewish concentration due to the population and it being approximately only 175 miles from Kiev. So the idea was, as the Ukrainian population would fall to the Nazis, they would be able to quick trip to Lublin, to Majdanek. It was an enormous camp, 1,300 acres. It housed, at its heyday, 250,000 prisoners. The camp was only 25% of the original plan. It was supposed to be approximately 5,000 acres. It had 144 barracks for prisoners, workshops for warehouses, and it expanded at one point to over 200, an area that was going to have 200 additional barracks, and you'll see in a few minutes that field. It had quarters for the SS men, a commandant's office, and of course the gas chambers and the crematoriums. So most of those buildings, it's not some, most of those buildings survive today, but not the wooden buildings. So the reason why I wanted to discuss this considering the threat of revisionism today, it's important that both the original gas chambers and the crematoria still survive at Majdanek. So one of the most interesting things about Majdanek was that, I'm actually going to stop the share for a minute, was that in May of 1944, the Soviets agreed that the British and the Canadian Air Force would destroy the supply lines to the Eastern Front. And without food and without water and without troops to resupply the Eastern Front, the Soviets would then attack. And without the supply lines to restock them with ammunition and food, etc., the Soviets would be able to conquer Eastern Poland. What happened was, by the way, the British and the Canadians did destroy the supply lines, but the Soviets waited 4 days. And the reason is that they wanted the Nazis, they wanted the soldiers to know that there was no way help was coming. And if they would have attacked initially, if they would have attacked right away, the Soviets, it was going to be hand-to-hand combat. And because the Nazis would think, oh, our soldiers are coming, we're gonna have plenty of food, but plenty of ammunition. They deliberately waited 4 days against the agreement, and General Omar Bradley was furious. But what happened was, when the Nazis in the camp saw that and they got word through the supply lines that there was no ammunition coming, there was no food coming, there was no relief soldiers. When the Soviets broke through the enemy lines, all the Nazis fled. They left everything. They didn't burn anything, they didn't destroy anything. Everything was left intact. And the other concentration camps, it was not so. For example, when you go to Birkenau, the gas chambers were actually destroyed by the Jewish Sodom commanders. The Jewish prisoners blew up, and that's an amazing story in itself. But when you go to most of the concentration camps, for example, when you go to Sobibor, it's a giant field. It's an empty field. When you go to Treblinka, it's an empty field. There's nothing there. And the reason is, for Sobibor, as you know, it was a successful revolution against the Wehrmacht and the SS, and thousands of prisoners escaped. And what happened was it was such an embarrassment to the Nazis that Himmler ordered that the camp be dismantled. And over the next 6 weeks, the entire camp was dismantled, taken apart, so there would be no trace of their failure. They were starved prisoners that beat the Nazis, so they had to remove evidence. And similar thing happened at Treblinka. There's nothing left at Treblinka except the tar pits where the bodies were burnt. And now it's a major memorial. So the idea is, what was really super unique about Majdanek was that the Nazis fled so quickly that everything is intact. When we go there with students, we warn them, by the way, this is really what tonight's about. So when we travel from, let's say, from Warsaw, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor. When we travel from Warsaw here to Lublin, it's about a 3-hour or 4-hour trip, 3.5 hours. And then we go to the yeshiva of Lublin and we have lunch. And then we tell them to get back on the bus and to get comfortable because, we have to get all the way to Majdanek. And the kids get comfortable. Some of them think they're about to fall asleep. Then about 6 minutes later, we drive into Majdanek and we pull over and they go, "What's going on?" She goes, "We're in Majdanek." It's 6 minutes from downtown Lublin. It's like going from Miami. It's like going from 71st Street to Bal Harbor Shops. That's how far Majdanek, the death camp, is from Lublin, the major metropolitan city. And that's what's so unique about it as well. So here you can see a Soviet ally aerial photograph documenting the death camp in use circa December 1942. And what's so interesting about this photo is it's been doctored. Well, first of all, you can see the massive barracks. But what's been doctored is they removed the proximity of the buildings. That afterwards, because they didn't want to emphasize how grotesquely involved the Polish people were. They knew exactly what was going on. And I have pictures to validate that this evening, you're gonna see that. So this is how, when you enter into the camp, this is a memorial this is how you enter into the camp. And these are natural hewn stones from the surrounding areas. It goes down. So in most of the concentration camps, the gas chambers are below ground so that the gas would not escape into the general vicinity. So what this is, you go down into the gas chambers, and then the bodies at the end were carried up and out. A lot of people say that this particular, and then you walk through, we call it the menorah, the Majdanek menorah. A lot of people say it's supposed to be a menorah, that they see 6 for the 6 million, 6 lights. But the artist never, who wasn't Jewish, by the way, the artist never confirmed that. It's a beautiful memorial. It's very, very breathtaking, and it's very important. When you descend these steps right in front of this picture at the 4-point, this is where you walk downstairs here, and the students walk down, and then we walk up, and we explain to them what they're about to see. Originally, this path was continuous before the memorial. During the Holocaust, this is the way that the victims would be brought into the camp. This was a straight path, a straight road. It was called the Black Path when it was in use. We're all familiar with the movie The Green Mile. Well, this was the Black Path. It is approximately a mile long. According to many, the path was paved with broken tombstones from local Jewish cemeteries, just like the road at the Plaszow camp, which was shown in Schindler's List. So the question is, what happened to the Jewish stones from the local Jewish cemeteries? And the answer is that for some reasons, the Soviets cleaned up the camp. We're not exactly sure why, but definitively in the 60s, the early 60s, although we have pictures of it, I have not been able to find the pictures, but plenty of people remembered it in the 60s and discussed that this path was paved with broken tombstones, headstones. You should know that the entire camp, I'm not sure if you can see, to the right of this path is very low land, and straight ahead is a hill. And I'm going to show you the hill in just a few minutes, but majority of the camp to the right is floods and has a difficulty with mud, especially many of my trips to Majdanek, the mud was ankle deep, and that's why they used the tombstones and desecrated local synagogue, cemeteries. This is the first gas chamber, the building outside. The area in front of it, I'm sorry, this is not the gas chamber. This is where they were forced to unclothe, where men, women, and children, their clothing was taken off of them. They were, and this was known as the Rosenfeld, where it was a Nazi joke. They would separate young, pretty girls, and after they would be forced to get undressed, they would make them march from this building to the gas chamber. And of course, many of these girls were ultra-Orthodox and grew up in very religious homes, and they never used to get undressed in front of anyone, let alone, not even family members, let alone in front of men that they weren't related to. And the Nazis would parade them, and they would call it the Rosenfeld because the girls would blush like red roses. And this is, and we know that there were approximately 200 barracks. And what's really interesting about all the barracks is wherever you go, if it's Auschwitz, if it's Birkenau, if it's Mauthausen, wherever you go, here in Majdanek, the barracks all look exactly the same on the inside, exactly the same, with very, very few exceptions. And one of the classic explanations for this is that IKEA, Rabbi, I don't understand. What do you mean IKEA? And the answer is a German company won the bid for making these, the ovens, for building the ovens, for building the camp structures, and these barracks was this one company. And it was like Henry Ford. They were mass produced, they were pre-cut, parts of them were even pre-assembled, and then they were shipped to the various concentration camps. And that's why they all look exactly alike, because it's like IKEA furniture. This at Majdanek was the first museum to operate on the site of a former camp. The main aims of the museum are maintain and manage the area, collect and do research on the relics of the camp, because they are still finding relics. So for example, in 2009, I think there was a horrible flood, a torrential rain, and it washed a large area away, and they found not stuff that had been hidden, just things that had been, covered over, in the first 40 years, 30 years. Research problems that refer to the camp, disseminate knowledge on Majdanek by means of exhibition, publications, and educational projects, collect art, anti-war things, and exhibit it. That's what the camp is supposed to do. I've never seen art, and I've never seen them disseminate information. But that's what that's what the camp is supposed to be doing, the museum at the camp. This is the gas chamber. After in the previous room, in the previous barracks, that barracks that I showed you, let me show it to you real quickly. This is the barracks where people were undressed. And this is the second barracks. It's across that Rosenfeld, across from the Rose Field. And this is the way it exactly looks today, is exactly the way it looked 75 years ago. And there are these wooden slats on the floor. And the reason why they put wooden slats on the floor is because there are no young people here, right? So I don't have to worry about it. I said no one under 14. So by this point, a lot of people lose control of their bladder, or, fear, etc. And it was very, and people would, when you're pushing thousands of people through these rooms a day, they would slip and fall. And that would just, Nazis were into efficiency. And by having wooden slats on the floor, it kept people from falling. And someone said, oh no, they've been just placed in the last 25 years. And according to the book, Majdanek, which is available in the, I hate to use the word, but in the gift shop, it says no, that these are, what's the correct term? Reproductions. They're not the originals, but this is what they had there. You also have to remember that this was at the low end, it's a low spot, and the hills around it would drain, and this area was extremely muddy. So to keep the victims from falling and slipping and slowing down the efficiency of the process, they used to put in these wooden slats on the floor. At the end of this walkway, at the end of this is a large, and you're going to see a large shower room. It was a shower room. There are 2 large concrete bathtubs there that were full of disinfectant. Why? Because approximately 5 to 10% every week would be allowed to, they became Sodom commanders. They became the people the Jews that were forced to maintain the camp. That means extract gold from their teeth, carry the bodies to the crematorium. So they were disinfected. They shaved them, got numbers, and they were disinfected. And the reason why they were disinfected is because they came from the ghettos where there was lice and dysentery and all things. And the soldiers, the Nazis had to protect the soldiers who would frequently come in contact with them. So Majdanek was a labor camp as well as an extermination camp for the Jews. I didn't want to get to too much specifics, but there was in I believe it was November of 43, in one day, there was an attempted escape, and the commandant went crazy, and he gathered up 23,000, and he couldn't, and they disrupted the crematorium. So the commandant went crazy, and 23,000 people were killed in one day. He had the machine gun and buried in a huge pit, and they had no time when they fled. They had no time to even unbury them and burn the bodies. So we know exactly where that pit is as well. This is the room. By the way, on the outside of the building, it said Bad und Disinfection. This is the first one. And if you look closely, you see that these were shower heads, and it was hooked up to water. Now, a lot of people are on the misconception that gas came out of this, and that's not true at all. This was real water. This was water, and it was ice cold, and you were naked. The Jews were naked, and they were spritzed with water. And yes, sometimes they were given these stone bars of soap. They weren't real soap, but the whole idea was to keep the Jews quiet, thinking that they were real. And this was a 95% of the, well, that's not even accurate. 98% of the Jews were killed. Once a week or once every 2 weeks as needed, they would kill the old Jews from the previous trips and replace them with stronger Jews that showed who had arrived. So the question is, why were the water spritzed with water? Why were they forced? And the answer is to humiliate them, to freeze them, but also they found that the gas, I noticed we have a number of doctors, and the doctors will tell you that the skin is a permeable membrane. And when the skin is wet, they found that it would absorb the cyclone B gas, not only through inhalation, but through the skin as well. So when people were wet, they could use less gas and people died quicker. And that was the whole thing, efficiency. So they would spray people with showers, and also what happens when people are freezing cold, they huddle together. So because you're freezing, so that no matter if you're naked, no matter if you're men or women or children, when you're freezing, people would huddle together and they can get more people into a room. So that's why it is a misconception and a misrepresentation that the gas came out of the shower heads. That's absolutely not accurate. And not only that, these pipes are very old galvanized pipes, and cyclone B gas is very corrosive. And there's no way that you could have pumped enough pressure to get the gas through the heads. It's a misconception. It's not, but there was murder at the showers. We were killed at the shower houses, but we were not, the gas did not come out of the shower heads. Are there any questions? Okay. So at the end of that corridor, there's off to the right. This is one of the 3 rooms that were gas chambers. The one on the bottom, it's the only gas chamber with a window. And what happened was it was originally a storage room, but they were running out of space. They needed to kill more Jews on a daily basis. So what they did was they ran a regular pipe from one gas chamber to the next gas chamber. They would fill up the large gas chamber with Zyklon B gas, wait for all the Jews to die, forced another 60 to 80 Jews in this really small room, lock the door and seal it. It did have a seal, a hermetic seal. And then they would just merely open up the plug and force the used Zyklon B gas from the large chamber into this small room. And that window till today has the 75-year-old hermetically seal on it. They've replaced it, I'm sure, but I shouldn't have said original. But you can see that it is a window that's been sealed up so that the gas would not escape. The window is also over 8 feet high. Why? So that the Jews could never get to it. Why didn't they brick it in? Well, they needed also the light to get the Jews moving, because it was dark. When you can't force people into a dark room as easy as a room that has a light. The picture on the left is actually the largest of the Majdanek concentration camps gas chambers. It is a metal door with a peephole. It had a rubber gasket to seal in the Zyklon B gas. The Zyklon B gas was very caustic, I think the correct term is, and the seal would have to be replaced frequently because they were always worried about the health of their soldiers, of the SS men who were running the gas chamber. Unfortunately, I could not find my picture, but of the room immediately adjacent. So there, immediately adjacent to the right of this room was a room that had the Zyklon B gas would be placed, the canister would be placed into this device. It would be open and drop. It would be aerate, and then they would pump it into this room. And it took anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes for everyone to die in the gas chamber. The reason why there was such a variant is it had to do with the size of the people, the weight of the people, how many people were forced in. Also had to do with air temperature and humidity would affect how long it would take. And the soldiers, the guards would just merely, I shouldn't say soldiers, they were called guards. The guards would just look through that peephole and wait for people to stop, their bodies to stop jerking, which is one of the side effects of the Zyklon B gas, was that while the body was dying, the people, soon they would wait an extra 4 or 5 minutes, and then they would pump out, they would vent the gas, and then the Sunderland commandos, the Jews, would be forced to go in there and remove the bodies. What you can see on all these concentration camp, all these gas chambers, you see this Prussian blue on the walls, wherever there was a gas chamber. If you notice, there's no wood on the walls. This is not a wood ceiling, by the way. This is a poured concrete ceiling. The reason why it looks like there are boards there is because that's how they held up the concrete while it was setting. But this is all concrete. The Prussian blue is a chemical reaction between the Zyklon B gas and the calcium carbonate in the plaster or in the cement. If I'm not mistaken, and I know Larry is a pharmacist and he knows his chemistry. If I'm not mistaken, Zyklon B gas is basically a cyanide.
Cyanide.
Right. And when cyanide hypochlorite is apparently a bright blue. And that's what happens. And here it is 75 years later. And the Zyklon B gas discoloration is still visible. Here it is in the ceilings. And here you can see it on the walls. Now, here's something really important. This is actually a Soviet photo of the Zyklon B gas canister stored in the gas chamber storage room. This is January. The camp was liberated in June, July of 45. But 6 months later, I mean, they left it there. Not only did the Nazis run through it, but the army was chasing the Nazis. So there was only about 500 Jews left in the entire camp. Everyone else had been killed. And what happened was the Soviets did not stay long. They left the Jews some food, and then they started chasing the Nazis. 4 or 5 years later, they came to start, and they started, what's the correct term, documenting. But you see these walls? These are wooden walls. In this room, I think it's my next picture. Yes, you see the walls? That's what, remember I told you, all of these barracks and all of these rooms were made by the German company that won the bid. They became, multi-billionaires, that company. Just as, by the way, the ovens were all made by the same German oven company that still today makes brick ovens and other things of that nature in Germany today. But you can see here the wooden walls, and here you see in this picture, this is an alternative barracks, but you should know, and again, I just want to make sure there's no one under the age of 14, because this is pretty graphic what I'm about to explain to you. This was known as the examination table. After the bodies were removed from the gas chamber, they were brought one by one into this room. And there were Jews, if anyone, I see many of us are physicians here, you all must recognize this table. This is like the equivalent of an autopsy table. If you look real closely right here, there's a drain. Can you see my cursor moving? That's a drain, because this is where a person's mouth was open, and the Jewish prisoners had to remove gold teeth. And depending on the situation, they would also search the body cavities for hidden gems and gold and silver and diamonds. And if the guard demanded it, they even would have to eviscerate the prisoner and check intestines to see if they had swallowed anything. And that's why this was a classic examination table. It's opened on the sides, and there's a huge drain on the floor where they would wash everything down once a day. And this is the actual crematorium, the primary crematorium. And it's actually up high. It was a significant climb down to the right, down this way, and about 1.5 blocks to 2 blocks, long blocks, I would say, 200 yards away, let's say, was the actual gas chambers. So the question is, why were the gas chambers so far away from the crematorium? So the answer is that this concentration camp was so close to the houses that they put the crematorium up on a hill so that the smoke would be above the house levels of the surrounding area, because the smell was so putrid of burning flesh. So they put the crematorium on a relatively higher hill. And that would also explain why the gas chamber is down in the lowest place, because the Zyklon B gas is heavier than air. And that's why when you go to Birkenau and to Mauthausen and the other concentration camps, the gas chambers were below ground level because the Zyklon B gas is lower, and you didn't want it to escape and kill the guards in the immediate vicinity. Although there's only one chimney, you'll see what it's like on the interior. There is actually a double row of ovens. As you see, you can count with me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's actually 8 of them. And on the opposite side of this brick wall, there were 8 more on the opposite side. And here you can see everything. This is the gurney that they would put the bodies. It's not broken, like the one in Auschwitz was blown up. It's not broken. The ovens, the gas lines are still there. Everything is, when we would meet with students, we'd explain to them, all you'd have to do is reconnect the heating lines, bring in the coal, and replace the pumps. And Majdanek could be up and running within 12 hours. That's according to the engineers, because the Nazis just ran away. Now, I'm not sure how to explain one of my personal difficulties. So these initial pictures show you what it was like in 2008. One of the things I used to do in 2008, 2010, 2012, the first 4 or 5, I would have my students right in front of these ovens, and I would instruct one of my students to take a tissue, and I would pour. Everyone walks around with water because we don't want the kids getting dehydrated. It's really harsh. It's really harsh emotionally, and it's hot sometimes, and so we have the kids drinking all the time. So I take a tissue, I wet it, I douse it, and I tell them, place your hand inside the oven and then rub the interior of the oven gently. And when they pull it out, guess what they find? Soot. 70 years later, you could still get soot off the sides of these ovens. I was told to stop doing it. I didn't. You know me, I'm a troublemaker. But here's the situation now. Now, well, I think it's the next picture. Yes. So in 2014, they put up this banister. It's made out of metal to keep people from getting close. In 2016, in addition to this banister, they now have like a glass partition. So you can see it, but it's behind a glass partition. Now, why did they do that? Well, they're worried. They are, rightfully so. Like, you know, I shouldn't have been doing things that I used to do there, like sticking my hands in. I shouldn't have been, you know. Here you can see the carbon, by the way, the 75-year-old carbon that's still left from the firings. You know, a lot of people get mad at the Poles for doing it, the Polish government for doing it, but I'm not mad at them. It's, you know, they have to do it. They have to, you know, protect the future. And by the way, the other things is that some people used to light candles. You know, that we give kids these little tea candles, memorial candles, but they're small. So it's a fire hazard because this is 75-year-old wooden buildings. You know, it's by the way, when you go to Birkenau, approximately 80% of the barracks are no longer there. And that's because lightning strikes, 80-year-old wood, it's nice and dry. And there have been series throughout the last 80 years where barracks have caught fire and burnt to the ground. And that's why they're doing their best to protect the historical facts of Majdanek. So in that regard, I'm not, no, it's hard, it's difficult, but you want everything to stay the same, and we can't. We have to protect the future. But again, as you can see, these burned. I know what I wanted to do. If you Google Majdanek Holocaust and add the word lies, Holocaust lies, one of the things they'll pull you up is Majdanek, and they'll tell you that these were bakers' ovens to feed the 250,000 people. Now, there's only one problem. Everyone knows what a baker's oven looks like, and it doesn't look like this. And more importantly is the proof. These are body gurneys. They put bodies in these long, thin ovens, 3 and 4 bodies at a time. So, these anti-Semites, these revisionists are so stupid. They don't even let the evidence, they don't even accept the obvious evidence about this. Here's another concern. So these are a number of those barracks that housed the victims, and now they are part and parcel of the museum. I would say the last 4 or 5 times I was at Majdanek, they were all locked. This picture that I have on the right here, so let me just read it real quickly. Beyond the gas chamber and the disinfection buildings is a row of buildings stained black with creosote. Creosote is like a chemical that they try to maintain to waterproof the structures so they don't disintegrate. These were originally called if you look at they have here at this museum in one of these buildings, they have the obscure paperwork that the commandant was ordering more barracks, and he called them horse barracks, horse barns. Exactly, but they were really these barracks. They were used to store the clothing and other items taken from the Jews. The brick pathway that you see here was definitely not original. It was added in the early 2000s because this area is very low. And I would say a vast majority of the times I went to Majdanek, mud up to your ankles. It was fixed. In fact, you see this puddle here? That's nothing, okay? And I can tell you right now, this is not April at Majdanek. But I will tell you that they've come in and they put this pathway, it's slightly elevated so that you don't get as dirty as because when I first came, this was nothing but mud. The survivors of Majdanek say it was always muddy in the camp, and in wintertime it was frozen mud, and it was a horrible, it was not like Birkenau. Birkenau had its own tragedies, but when you walk in here now, these are shoes. And there were 3 barracks of shoes. You cannot, it's been a long time since you've been able to go in and see the shoes. And the reason is that these are leather shoes. And when you did walk in, you could smell the decomposing leather. It's not air conditioned in the summer, and it can go up to, seriously, it can get very hot in Poland, in case you're not aware. It can go up into the mid 90s. And in winter, -5. I was in Auschwitz, I was in Poland, January 20th, 1995, and it was 11 degrees. And with the wind chill, it was like -10. So the whole idea is you have these extremes of temperatures. These shoes are decomposing. You can tell they're all black and mildewy and smelly. And if the door is open, we ask the kids not to go in there because who knows what toxins are in there. It smells horrible. And all it is hundreds of thousands of rotting shoes. And there used to be 3 barracks open. So you can get an idea of the vastness of the waste. Now, what's interesting is that they saved these shoes for eventually to be sent back to Nazi Germany, but they were killing so many Jews that they didn't need the shoes anymore. They need the leather, and they just warehoused it there for the interim. Land was cheap, and they just hundreds of thousands of pairs of shoes. These are the guard towers, and if they look familiar, they're exactly similar, with a few exceptions, to that which you will see at any other concentration camp. And I'm sorry if I coined the term Nazi IKEA, but that's what it is. However, what you see here is that some of these towers were boarded up on the bottom. And that's because the wind was so strong at this camp that soldiers were permitted that once they walked to the perimeter in wintertime, they were allowed to like step into this semi-protected, like a bus stop. It was closed up on three sides. And sometimes they would have a fire burning inside, like in a can, because it was so bitter cold. However, if I take you back to all of these, you see any chimneys? At least when you go to Birkenau, you'll see that the initial Birkenau barracks all had chimneys. They never had any heat, but the reason why these were called the horse barns as compared to the other barracks is because these didn't even have chimneys when they were housing Jews. So the soldiers were allowed to have, when they would do a rotation, they were allowed to warm up in this, like, for lack of a better term, this three-way boxed in area underneath each one of these towers. If it looks familiar, it should. This is, again, every single concentration camp had these 3 tiers of these, I don't want to call them beds, but I'm sure you're all familiar with the very famous picture out of Birkenau, in which it's a picture of Elie Wiesel as one of the victims. It's all the same. It looks exactly the same no matter where you go. This is very interesting. There was a sculpture in Majdanek. His name was Albin Bonecki, and he was a relatively famous sculptor. And when the Nazis found out who they were, they commissioned him to do sculptures. Very few of them survived. But I found, this is, by the way, this picture on the right, the turtle, is not my picture. I couldn't find my picture of the turtle, but I just wanted to share, these are the 2 of the more famous ones. There were attitudes that the inmates, that the victims, that the Jews had, and that was never work too fast, work slowly, because there's no benefit to working fast. You're burning more calories, you're using more energy. And, and today you say, oh, you moved 10 pounds of rock. Well, then tomorrow, I don't care if you're not feeling well, if you still have to move 10 pounds of rock. So the idea was, this artist, Bonecki, one of his frequent sculptures was a tortoise. Why? Slow, go slow. And that is actually an act of rebellion. Don't do your best, do your worst. Don't rebel at every chance you have. What you have here on the left, it is a monument that Bonecki, he came to the commandant and he said that there's no monument here, that when you guys leave Poland after killing all the Jews, there's not going to be any proof that you were here and you killed all the Jews. And he commissioned him to make this this monument. But unbeknownst to him, the top has 3 eagles facing in 3 different directions. The only thing is, once you're there, you can see it. It's not a Nazi eagle. It's the Polish eagle. And the commandant never took notice of it. So again, it was an act of rebellion. Plus, they were able to smuggle the ashes of at least 1 Jew and put it under the monument so that they could at least bury 1 of the Jewish people. And that's why here you can see a matzeva that was placed in the early 1990s, I believe, by some of the survivors of Majdanek, because it's they did definitely symbolically get a number of ashes to this place. And in the background, you can see again the barracks. Now, when the Soviets arrived and they saw the pit I mentioned to you of 33,000 Jews, and then they saw where the remains of the crematoriums were brought, rather than, they didn't know what to do with this, literally a hill of remains. So what they did was they originally just put a cover over it. And then as part of the museum effort, they built this huge kippah. It's concrete. And this is what it looks like from the outside. And this is what it looks like. This is a mound of remains. It's approximately 40 feet tall. When you stand here, or you can sit here on this like ledge, you can look down about 2.5 stories. That's how big this mound is of remains. Now, what you can't also really tell is that this is the crematorium is immediately to the right, and this is where the remains were brought. So this is when, Rabbi, what's the scandal? You keep on making mention of a scandal. So if you look closely here, this is the scandal. The city of Lublin. This is the crematorium. The city of Lublin this is not such a good picture. I'm going to show you more pictures. This is about 100 yards from the camp, but they're on a hill overlooking the camp. There's no way they didn't see any of this, because I got to remind you, there were no train tracks into Majdanek, and there are no train tracks into Majdanek. The Jews were trucked in by lorry, or they were marched in through the streets of Lublin, in but never out. And they saw it all. Now I'm going to show you some more pictures. By the way, someone asked me, what is this here? Let me see if I can make it larger for you. So remember I told you there's a serious problem with fire? These are actually ladders. Those are actually ladders for fire, in case of fire, so that people can, get on top of the roof and put out fires. This room here to the right, this is where you would go in, and this is where, right here, is where the examination table was. So let's see if we can make that smaller again. Okay. Again, the purpose of this picture is to show you brick homes. Now, this field is where there was an additional 200 barracks here. You see this here? Here's the barracks, and this is where there are 200 more barracks. And over here is where you can see where the city, there are buildings. Now, I'm not saying they're not modern buildings. They're old 100-year-old brick buildings over here, right up to, I'm not going to exaggerate. I'm not going to tell you 10 feet from the electrified fence. I'm not going to exaggerate and tell you 5 feet, but I'm going to tell you within 40 feet of the exterior fence, there are houses till today. And you can see it right here. By the way, whoops, let me go back. This is the path where the Jews were forcibly brought in. Behind us, and now you can see, I think, remember I was explaining to you that this is the high ground. The crematoria is to the left here. The mound is behind us, where we're standing now. Can you see how you can only see the top of the barracks is? Can you see how there's a slope here and then another slope? The gas chambers are down here. So the question is, how did they bring the dead bodies from here to the gas chamber, which is to the left? And the answer is Jewish labor. Can you imagine the labor involved in every single day carrying anywhere from 2,000 to 3,500 Jews uphill to the crematorium? But they didn't want the neighbors complaining about the smell. And that's why the crematoria had to be up and why the gas chambers had to be down, lower. So why didn't they just dig a basement? And the answer is they had problems with flooding. You dig a basement, it would flood. So they built the barracks and the gas chamber down lower, but the crematoria had to be higher. And again, if you look, this is the picture I showed you before. This is the main entrance when you go into the camp. Here you can see, that the memorial with the covering of the large ash pit. And here you can see now you know what you're looking for. You're looking at how close the town is right up to the, this is the interior fence. And then there's another interior fence that fenced in the Jews. And this is the town of Lublin. Again, you take the kids to the yeshiva of Chachmei Lublin, it takes about 3.5 hours to get there. We feed them, we show them the yeshiva, we explain everything to them, et cetera, et cetera. And then we put them back on the bus and goes, okay, we got it, all right, get comfortable. And 6 minutes later, what do you mean get off the bus? I thought yep, 6 minutes later, there we are, we're in the death camp. Again, you can see the barbed wire and the proximity of the city in the background. Again, you can see the barbed wire and the proximity of the city in the background. Here's a better shot of it. Again, the barracks is, and here you can literally see how close am I exaggerating? Look how close the barracks are. Hold on just a second. I'm not exaggerating. Now, these taller buildings are Soviet era buildings from the 50s. But if you look closely at these buildings, they're all brick. Well, you can't really see them well. These are much older buildings, right up to the barbed wire on the other side. I'm not sure if you can see the barbed wire, the verticals there. Here's the crematorium. Here you can see the ladder much better, but you can see how close the city of Lublin is to Majdanek crematorium. These shoes are no longer on display. And you can see why, how they rotted over 75 years because of the extremes of temperature, humidity, etc. It's not the Polish people's fault. But the real problem is that the less evidence around, the less we can prove Holocaust deniers. And that's the problem. Human remains after an unseasonal rainstorm. This was, I think, in 2014. And here you can see this is human remains. Here you can very easily identify human bone, fragments from skulls. The rabbi this is not my picture. The rabbi called over 2 other rabbis. They called Rabbi, I forgot his name, Chief Rabbi of Poland. His name is Shudrich. Shudrich came, they put up a tent over the area and they collected as many bones as they could without redigging. They did not want to dig down. Shudrich took the bones and we went to Jerusalem 3 days later and he had a burial ceremony on Har Herzl, the military cemetery for the fallen heroes of Israel. And I think I pulled it off at 8:02. There's one comment. Let me read it. It's from Steve. Hi, Rabbi. Do you think the Holocaust should remain to be taught as a singular event? What are your thoughts about using the term to describe other genocides? Also, your thoughts about museums or institutions like Anne Frank House broadening their missions to discuss racism. Okay, so one thing at a time. These are excellent questions. So the first question is, first of all, the Holocaust is unique. So one of the most unique things about the Holocaust is all previous genocides were by lower class, uneducated peasantry that went crazy and killed Jews. What's unique about the Holocaust is the Holocaust was the genocide of the Jews was formulated by the intelligentsia of Germany. Doctors, judges, lawyers, dentists, They were brilliant men, and they all became the leaders of the final solution. So that's the first thing that's unique about the Holocaust. The second thing about the Holocaust is that Elie Wiesel said it, may rest in peace. He said something like, although it's true that not every victim was Jewish, every Jew was a victim. So that's the second thing that's unique about the Holocaust, is that it targeted primarily Jewish people. Now, I know what you're thinking, but what about, the incorrect term is gypsy. We should never use that word gypsy. They're called Roma. Calling a person of Roma descent a gypsy is like using the N-word. So yes, it's true that the Nazis killed Roma, the Nazis killed homosexuals, the Nazis killed, it is absolutely true. It is absolutely accurate. However, Lucy Davidovich, in her book called Hitler's War Against the Jews, her premise is very easily substantiated, that if you look at the way that Hitler programmed his war, it follows the Jewish population centers. So for example, when Hitler got to Dunkirk, the French coast, why did he stop? Why didn't he cross the English Channel, which is only, 22 miles wide? Why did he not invade a broken Great Britain and take over Great Britain? The Air Force was destroyed. London was in shambles. He just killed 25,000 of their elite troops at Dunkirk. Why didn't he cross? And the answer is, because there was only 65,000 Jews in Great Britain at the time. 100,000 Jews. Where were the Jews? Poland, Eastern Europe. And that's why, if you look at the Anschluss, look at the direction. He makes like a semicircle. Why? Because he's following the Jewish population centers. So this is what the rabbis and historians, one of the great historians, he's president of, he's not president, he's dean of Touro. His name is Henry Abrams. He's a brilliant scholar. And he takes Lucy Davidovich's premise to the next degree and proves it using documentation from military history. I just want to answer Stephen's second question, chat. The second question was, what do I think about institutions like the Anne Frank House broadening their missions to discuss racism? So my answer to that, or exhibits about George Floyd on Holocaust Remembrance, their discussion of other genocides. So it might be politically incorrect to say this, and I'll probably get into a lot of trouble if you repeat it. I'm not ashamed of it. I think it's wrong. I think that Jews and Jewish institutions should remember Jewish victims of genocide, and that there are plenty of other organizations for non-Jews to remember their Jewish, their non-Jewish, or their African-American genocides. Or, I mean, honestly, if you go to Washington, D.C., there is a museum of African-American history. I guarantee you, there's no memorial to the Holocaust there.
And there are no Jewish names of people who supported civil rights either. That
Right.
museum is that's a huge problem in that museum.
Right. So my point to you is that initially my thoughts were, when I found out that, there's, good, there's no mention of the Holocaust, good, because it shouldn't be in the African-American History Museum. It should be it was the Jewish people. Now I have to tell you, there's a memorial at Babi Yar, and the Babi Yar, the Ukrainians put up a memorial to Babi Yar in 2004. And Rabbi Avi Weiss and I were going to go. We put together a delegation, and we were screaming mad, because you know what the Ukrainians said? Here, 33,000 Ukrainian citizens were mass murdered by the Einsatz group. You know what? In 1942, they never called us Ukrainian citizens. We were Jews. We were Jude, right? But now all of a sudden, the Ukrainians, so we were complaining and complaining and complaining. And there was there was a reorganization of the committee, and sure enough, now the memorial has English, Ukrainian, Russian, German, French, and Hebrew, and it does say Jews. But it took about 8 years for it to happen. Andrew, do you have your hand up? And then I think I heard Ahuva. Andrew, just unmute yourself.
Yes, so thank you for the presentation, Rabbi. So you made mention a couple times to the proximity of the homes and kind of city to the concentration camps. Is that because there were people that were in denial or were silent? Can you talk about that some?
So the district of Lublin, called Lublin Goroshna Gaboynia, was notorious for being anti-Semitic. And that's why, that's the other thing, that if you look at a lot of the concentration camps, they put them in areas where the local people would not bitch about it. So the fact that they, by the way, this was all open area. This was like, they could have moved it, 20 miles away. They didn't want to. There's no need to. The locals didn't care. And that's just the fact. The worst part is, like, you can say in Birkenau, Birkenau is like 2 miles outside of Auschwitz, even though, the Red Army, that liberated Birkenau in the 82nd Airborne, when they liberated Bergen-Belsen, 2 days away, they could smell the burning flesh. 60 miles away, you could smell it. So when they say, oh, we didn't know. Well, you didn't see 3,000 Jews marched into the concentration camp on a daily basis, and the only way out was smoke, but you didn't know what was going on? No. They came in by trucks, but actually mostly they came in by being marched in on foot, and everyone knew, they all knew. And that's the tragedy of Majdanek. That's the uniqueness of Majdanek, because there were no trains. At least in Birkenau, trains went in. Who knows what was on the trains? The doors closed, and they could say, we don't know what was going on behind those walls. We didn't know who got off the trains, but Lublin, no excuse. So that all being said, I just want a quick note that remind everyone that Friday night at Temple Menorah, we're having an Israeli IDF representative. He's a sergeant in the IDF. He specializes in lecturing about global anti-Semitism. Fits right into the idea of Yom HaShoah. And if you call tomorrow morning, we can fit you in. We're limiting it to, I think, 90 people because of whatever reasons. Ahuva, so call tomorrow morning. You got to come. It's going to be an amazing. Google the guy. He's a phenomenal speaker. Yes, Ahuva, you had a question.
Would you say, can we say that the Germans were not really religiously driven to kill the Jews, but racist, like racial driven?
Scientific racism. In fact, that's one of the amazing things. Remember I told you the intelligentsia? I mean, Goebbels used to come to the concentration camps, and he had like these molds that he would fit over people's faces.
Right, with measurements, with all of
right, to scientifically prove that we were inferior.
Also, I think that to prove that the fact that there was no choice of conversion, like we saw in the Spanish Inquisition, like if you converted, you were okay, you know? So there was no choice like that given to the Jews in Germany. And also that they went back a few generations as well.
Absolutely. Hold on. I'm just answering Brandon, 866-0221. Brandon, call the office tomorrow morning. If you want to come, we'd love to have you. Yes, Ahuv, you're absolutely correct. It was not a religious anti-Semitism, which was also unique. It was intelligentsia. It was scientific anti-Semitism. It was pure racism. We were rats and cockroaches that need to be exterminated. And if you look at the language, that's the language they use, extermination, the way that you would exterminate a rat or a cockroach or any other disease-causing animal or bug. By the way, in Prague, I'm sure I'm sure, raise your hand by show of hands. How many of you have seen Holocaust Torahs? Come on, you've all seen Holocaust Torahs. Many synagogues have a Holocaust Torah. So interesting thing about Holocaust Torah is that Hitler ordered a museum of the history of the Jew. And what they did is they were collecting outside of Prague, a warehouse documenting the history of the Jewish people. Because Hitler was afraid that people would forget that there were these disgusting people and he wanted the world to, you know what? We don't have rats anymore. Thank you, Hitler. He wanted a museum to prove that there once had been, 15 million Jews, but he killed them all and that the world would owe him. So they assembled about 80 or 90,000 Torahs. And for a number of years, if you knew someone or whatever, you would get a Torah released to you. And there are many synagogues that have them on display. Why don't we have a Holocaust Torah? The answer is really not supposed to display a Torah. I have issues with it. If a Torah is not kosher, you have to respectfully retire it by burying it. If you're going to dance with it on Simchas Torah, okay, fine. Then you keep it in a cloak in the ark, properly dressed. It's not like you don't put a Holocaust Torah on display. Yes, I'm sorry if I insulted some of our colleagues and rabbis who have, some pluck, but it's really, listen, it says in the Code of Jewish Law that you're not allowed to hold up the Torah parchment with your hands. Then people come to me, but Rabbi, in Simchas Torah, I went to this Reform synagogue and they unraveled the entire Torah in the sanctuary and everyone got to hold up the Torah. It was so beautiful.
I know.
It's
The
Code of Jewish law. That's exactly what you're not allowed to do. But what are you gonna do?
Rabbi,
Yes, Mort.
considering the attitude of the Polish people and the denial of the Holocaust,
Their responsibility for it.
who is responsible for maintaining these camps now to ensure that they don't disappear? There was the issue about, I think Disneyland a few years ago being built on one of them.
So in actuality, I don't know anything about Disneyland being built on a concentration camp, but I will tell you that they announced that they were building a mall across the street from Auschwitz I. And a group of us were going to go and we were like really livid. And no matter what we did, it wasn't going to happen. It went ahead. And when you go there, it's there. And in fact, it has a fast food restaurant. It's like the equivalent of a McDonald's. But that's Auschwitz I. And Auschwitz I is surrounded, not Birkenau, which is called Auschwitz II, Birkenau. Auschwitz I was built in the late 1890s by the Polish. It was originally a, what do they call it, bivouac for Polish soldiers. That's Auschwitz I. It's made out of brick. It's got, it's got a little hospital because it was like a military camp. That's Auschwitz I. No Jews were ever kept in Auschwitz I for more than a week or two. That's if they had special skills. But regardless, as Auschwitz I, across the street, where there are, because it's surrounded by the original city, we couldn't control it. It had to do with zoning, and it was already zoned for commercial purposes, and all they had to do was break out a window, and they put in it was for fallen. So I know about that strip mall, which is across the street from Auschwitz I, and it's horrible. What also bothers me, in the parking lot of Auschwitz I is, I don't want to even call it a kiosk. It's a huge kiosk. It's like, when you go into it's like the size of a small bodega, like when you buy gas, and they sell, well, they used to. I only went into once. They sell they don't obviously tell you how long ago I went in it. They had cameras, disposable cameras, and they sold film, and they sold water, and it was an enterprise. It was a business enterprise that someone got a license to be in the large parking lot of Auschwitz I. Now, I don't know anything about Disney World, but I will tell you the primary question you had is that who is in charge of maintaining these properties? The answer is there is a cooperative that was signed in 1951, I think, by France, Germany, England, the United States, the Soviet Union, Poland, and a few other countries. And they agreed that the United Nations, when it became formulated in a more structured way, would provide for maintenance of the historically important places. Now, vast majority of the financing comes from the Polish government. So I know what you're saying. Wow, that's really nice. The Polish government is fitting the bill to maintain these properties. It's not that I don't like the Poles, and it's not that I don't like the Polish government. There's no, I don't hate people, but I will tell you that there's no business like Shoah business. I know everything is so inviting. The Shoah business, the Shoah industry in Poland is hundreds of millions of dollars every year. And it's not just March of the Living when 40,000 people come to Poland. Whoa, Rabbi, you just said that that a good year there are 20,000. Yes, there are 20,000. And then there are journalists, and there are doctors, and there are nurses, and that the Israelis who come for security, it's about 1,000 people. And then what about all the people? They open up huge warehouses to feed 25, 30,000 people kosher food. It's a big industry. Now think about it for just a second. How many camps are there in Poland? Auschwitz, Birkenau, Sobibor, Treblinka, Majdanek, Chalmo. You get the idea? There are a lot of concentration camps in Poland. Now let me ask you a next question. Tourism to Poland. What are you doing in Poland on tourists? Are you going to go skiing? What's Poland famous for? And the answer is Polish people go there a lot. They see the castles, there's castles, there's beautiful landscape. But Google it, Polish tourism. There's really not much to see in Poland. There's no Eiffel Tower. There's no famous museums. There's no Louvre. There's nothing. Showa business in Poland is big business. And that's why.
Call from 7722-688.
And that's why the Polish government is making sure that the camps are maintained properly. It's a big industry. Think of the hotels and buses and food, and it's big business. And by the way, you should know March of the Living, it's just one tour. Do you know that every major Jewish organization has what's called a Polish Heritage Tour? They all do. JNF, UJA, the youth movements, NCSY, USY. It's called Polish Pilgrimage. All the major organizations go to Poland. It's not just March of the Living. So the good news is the bad news. I see somebody else has a question. Let me see what this is. Roberta, I don't know Roberta's last name. Roberta, you want to share your last name because it's cut off? Hold on. Roberta Schombrun. Thank you, Roberta. She appreciates the class. Thank you. Editorial from New York Times about German car companies. They are the heirs of Nazi fortunes and they aren't apologizing. So actually, I had this conversation with someone just a couple of days ago so someone said to me about some German product, and Ukrainian product. It was something made in Ukraine. I said, they were so, he says to me, they were just like Nazis. So I go, okay, so you're not going to buy a Ukrainian product because 70 years ago there were some Ukrainians that were bad to Jews. Then what about all the Jews who buy BMWs, Volkswagens, Mercedes, Rosenthal, China, do I need to go on all the products that were made in Germany that we purchase all the time, left and right? So why is that
Ovens
okay?
in Dachau,
What?
Rabbi, the ovens in Dachau, the ovens, there's the BMW sign on them.
So I don't know about, I was in Dachau, but I can tell you that majority of the ovens it's one company in Germany that still makes ovens.
I remember the
Yeah.
ovens in Dachau.
So it was like they won the bid and they produced, thousands and thousands of ovens. They also produced the heaters that were in concentration camps. I mean, it was a business, and they won. But regardless, so what was that chat? Forgive me, I forgot who said it. Editorial from New York Times about German car companies. So it's bad, but I have to tell you something about Germany. Do you know that there's only one country in the world where it's illegal to say there was never a Holocaust? Germany. Do you know that there's only one country in the world that has freedom of speech unless you say something, against that the Holocaust never occurred? Germany. Do you know that there's only one place in the world where freedom of speech does not include the ability to fly a swastika? That's Germany. Interesting. Here in America, you can get up, they got a full page ad in the New York Times and say the Holocaust never occurred. Can't do that in Germany. It's illegal. Yes, Stacy, you're muted.
I just want to let everyone know, and I think, I don't know if we've mentioned it before, about the book by Dara Horn about People Love Dead Jews, which really sort of turns on its head what we've done about Holocaust education, and maybe we've done a bad job. The whole issue of the Anne Frank Museum and the people running it, and how anti-Semitism is alive and well, and what we can do. And she reinterprets a lot of things that I think we took for granted about Holocaust memorialization and history.
Right.
A very, very interesting book.
So one of the things that concerned me over the last 2 years or 3 years with Black Lives Matter is that so many of these Jewish organizations were, stabbing each other in the back to make a more dynamic, Black Lives Matter statement, but not one regional Black Lives Matter, what do you call it, club, I forget the correct term, district, ever has made any statements against anti-Semitism, especially the one in New York, where last year had a 900% increase in the number of Jewish anti-Semitic assaults, 2,771 assaults in 1 year. And all these organizations that we were bending over backwards to show our support for, not one of them has come out with a statement. Not one. But we were issuing statements left and right. I'm not saying it's wrong, but there's no reciprocity. You know why? Because the world loves dead Jews. I love that. It's a good point.
Rabbi,
Yeah, Roz?
before you sign out, first of all, great class today. Thank you very much. I'm sure everyone, it was very informative.
Absolutely.
The second thing I wanted to ask you, you had mentioned your trip to next year to Poland with the mission. Who is organizing that? Is that through the Federation? Do we sign up, or
Federation.
it's all through? It's not through the march, correct?
Yes, but not the march, but make sure if you want to go on my bus,
Yeah.
make sure you say Rabbi Pearlson's bus.
Okay,
But
through
I
the
think they're up to like
Federation,
4
not through the
buses
march.
already.
That's what I wanted to make sure with you. It's not through the march. Okay.
No, it's through Federation, right? By the way, because of COVID-19, there have been people who've gone to Poland and not go on to Israel. Don't do that. You cannot go through Auschwitz, Birkenau, Treblinka, Majdanek. You cannot do that and then just come home. It's an emotional burden you will never be able to recover from. You have to go to Israel. You have to cleanse. You have to see Israel. And what's really great about the way that we do the March of the Living is it's Yom HaShoah in Poland. And then 1 week later, it's singing and dancing and going crazy on the streets of Jerusalem on Yom Ha'atzmaut, Israeli Independence Day. It's the way to do it. It really is. It's a way to do it. Otherwise, it's just too painful. All right, well, Chava, I hope everyone enjoyed the class.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank
Very
you.
appropriate.
Show me you liked it by coming to shul on Friday night and Shabbos.
Absolutely.
Okay, it's good to see everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Lila Tov.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Laila Tov.
Lila Tov, everyone.
We're gonna see you Friday, right?
God willing, everyone.